Welcome to Implicating the Real. Today's show is part 2 of the conversation began in the previous episode. Let's get right into it. Hope you enjoy. How we doing?
Can I share a quote?
Yeah.
It's somewhat relevant. This is from Conversations with Seth, Volume 2, which was written by Sue Watkins, one of Jane's close friends. I believe that book is comprised of basically transcriptions of Seth's ESP classes, or Jane's ESP classes, where Seth spoke to people.
Yeah, Jane would channel Seth, but Rob wouldn't be there to record them, and so like what we have of them is usually another student would take it on themselves to write it down.
Yeah. So Seth says, when you are in a position of safety, you do not help by pretending that you are not safe or by taking upon yourself the agony of others. Your reality when you are safe is a reality of security. From that framework, you have strength, validity, grace, exuberance, additional energy that you can send out to touch the hearts and the realities of other people. If you become so frightened of realities that are not your own, if you take upon yourselves tragedies that do not exist in your reality, in your moment then, you weaken your position and you weaken the position of those you think you are helping. You look about you and you see only hopelessness and helplessness. You organize your reality according to the tragedies of the newspapers.
Yeah.
I have this like Google Doc of Seth Quotes on Worry is what it's titled. It's basically Seth chewing Jane and Rob out for worrying and basically telling you, like, worrying is the dumbest thing you can do when you get what you focus upon.
Right.
And when you create your reality according to your thoughts, beliefs, and expectations. So he's literally saying, like, it's not helpful for you to worry about people because it hurts them. And he directly, I don't know if you know, like Jane suffered from arthritis-like symptoms a lot. And Rob, her husband, would worry about them. And Seth would directly call out Rob and be like, you're really not helping. Like, you're not helping. You need to see her as able-bodied and stop worrying about her, because when you worry about her, you essentially like transmit to her thoughts of like, you suck, you're frail, you're helpless, like you can't do this. And she picks up on that and it weakens her position. You're hurting her. So like,
well, and I think a lot of like disability advocates would agree with that kind of stuff too, right?
Yes.
Where it's like, no, like you need to be able to see me as able, you know?
Yeah.
Don't see me as disabled.
That's a good point.
This is going to be really controversial. There is some point in the books, I don't remember exactly where, but Seth says that some charities do way more harm than good because they like victimize the subset of people they're trying to help, where they're like, oh, these people are helpless, they're always sick. I think he said that cancer foundations have caused like more cancer than cigarettes have because it gets healthy people focusing on cancer, freaking out about cancer, but they're like, you might have cancer. You're over 50. You should get screened. You might have this. It happens to 1 out of 8 people. And then people freak out and they manifest their own cancer.
He maybe said that. He definitely said that like once they had to put the warning labels on cigarettes, that like did way more damage to people's health than the actual cigarettes.
Seth's anti-warning label?
Yeah.
What about on other stuff? Like, would Seth say that like we shouldn't keep people out of Chernobyl? We should just like forget that it happened so that we like people can just go chill out there?
I think he actually says it was a mistake for us to like explore nuclear.
Really?
Doesn't he? Or maybe that was this. I'm confusing. Maybe that's like a different channeled entity I'm thinking of. A channeler called Ramon Stevens, and a channel is an entity called Alexander, which I read one of the books and it was pretty great actually.
Really?
But it was Sethian. I got a lot from it. But one of our friends from our book club had actually met this channeler and had a kind of a bad experience. And I think the channeler was berating the people listening about exploring nuclear energy. So forgive me, I should not attribute that to Seth.
That's kind of fair though, because like this is like hippies in like whatever, you know, like the 70s or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Like the anti-nuclear sentiment was like pretty high at the time. Like it would not be surprising if they all across the board were like, yeah, no, screw nuclear.
I mean, nuclear, like of all the things that are like toxic and dangerous, like that's, and like long lasting, that's pretty up there, you know, like we can really fuck ourselves over with.
Have you heard of the like that like whatever, like the death sphere or whatever that they made?
Mm-mm.
Where it's like 2 halves of like a sphere of like radioactive material that like if they touch each other, they release like a shitload of like radiation, like energy.
I mean, like, they created this purposely.
Yeah. And then they kept them like stored right next to each other. And then like people would come like show off the lab and they would like try to like poke them as close as possible to each other as like a parlor trick. But then one time somebody accidentally went like clink and like touched them, and then all the people in the room fucking like died or something or got cancer or some shit.
Where and when is this?
I gotta look this up. Hold on. We're gonna
But doesn't that like
this podcast.
actually like check out like something like people would do?
Well, yeah, it's like nuclear stuff to me is like the closest to like fantasy realism, you know, as like here's this like evil object of great destructive power that's just like a fucking magical rock, you know? And it's like through the wizardry of the nuclear physicist, I have this death device that I'm going to use as a toy.
To some extent, I think maybe having it in this world does imply that there is some sort of like societal evolution. Like, I mean, you can think in terms of like, it's actually pretty shocking we haven't blown ourselves up yet. Like, since we've had this technology for almost 100 years, you know? I mean, 80 years, I guess I should say, but yeah, like it is kind of shocking that no one's pushed the button beyond those first couple times.
I'm on the Seth search engine just
Yeah.
searching about the term nuclear. There is a lot of talk of 3 Mile Island,
Oh, yeah.
but Seth's overall sentiment is not that it's bad,
Okay.
just that we can make it really good.
Yeah.
But he does talk about how much fear there was in the 70s about, you know, what could happen.
Mhm.
And I think that's why we had some catastrophes, but none of them world ending. But
Yeah.
I don't think Seth would ever villainize any one technology because, you know, there's 2 sides of the coin, always.
Yeah, when I heard that sentiment, and again, forgive me, listener, for confusing that with contributing it to Seth, but like, it was strange to me that like humans actually had the power to like go beyond what they're supposed to do. Because I felt like, you know, the reality can be set up in a way that like there is just like safeguards in place for things like that.
I haven't read anything by Alexander or that person,
Yeah.
but that doesn't sound right to me. There is nothing that we're not
That's what I'm
supposed to do.
saying.
It's a sandbox world for us to explore.
That's what I'm saying is like that it was hearing that like made me really wonder, like it's kind of unnerving that we would actually have that power. And
Yeah.
I think that's probably not the case.
I mean, Seth has said that our ego was never meant to turn out the way it did in our world.
Whoa.
Maybe that's what he meant. Like, maybe that's what Alexander meant. Not that, like, oh, this is off limits and you guys weren't supposed to touch this. Maybe they were just like, you know, you guys weren't ideally supposed to develop it in that way because there was this more obvious source of energy that y'all bypassed.
Yeah, maybe it was like you guys, the way you developed, aren't supposed to have this because you're too egotistical.
We're in the cool timeline where we don't follow the rules.
Yeah.
What did you mean by the like Seth says that like our ego didn't develop the way it was supposed to?
He doesn't mean egotistical.
Well, yeah.
He specifically defines ego as like essentially the eyeball of our conscious mind where the ego chooses what to focus upon. But he does say that the ego has become overdeveloped to our detriment because we have completely forgotten the importance of intuition, and our society has trended more towards like almost a fanatical approach of intellectualism at the cost of all intuition.
Yeah. Wasn't there something in this chapter about something that happened in just the last 100 years? I thought there was a quote about the last century. I don't know. Whenever we're talking about like the challenges of the ego in Sethian terms, I always think of like the 3 creative dilemmas, and that like this outer ego, as Seth defines it, which would be our waking consciousness. Part of what's happening here is taking on this impossible challenge. It's trying to see itself as completely separate, which is impossible. But by taking on this challenge, there's some like new fruitful things that happen. And maybe, I don't know if this is exactly what you're saying, but like we've just gone too far, too rigidly in this direction.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I do have the quote here if you want me to read it. This is from an ESP class, so it's not in the published material. Not in like the official Seth books, but they're in the early class sessions, book 1. Now, you have made physical reality something different than was intended. You did this through using your own free will. Your egos have become overdeveloped, overly specialized. They are focused so strongly within physical reality, and physical reality is far more painful than was originally intended. You are indeed, in very strong respects, within a dream. It is you who have made the dream too vivid. You were to work out problems and challenges, but you were always to be aware of your inner reality and of your true home. To a large extent, you have lost contact with this. You have focused so strongly upon physical reality that it has become indeed reality, the only reality that any of you know. So I think it's what Michael was saying, where you're supposed to have these two halves, like the intellect and the intuition, where you're like listening to your entity, your like higher self.
Yeah.
But we've just like done away with that because we've said that it's not intellectual to do that. It's, it's ignorant to do that. That's like woo-woo stuff. The example that comes to mind is like pilots have to listen to ground control to effectively fly. If you're not listening to the air traffic control tower about what other planes there are, and you're just doing your own thing, that would be the disaster. But when people like, it's tricky because Seth has said we have become too intellectual. So some people would misunderstand it and think, oh, the opposite of intellect is like stupidity as opposed to intuition.
Right.
So I don't want people to think like, oh, we're supposed to be dumber. No. I'm not saying that the skills to fly a physical aircraft are void and not relevant. They are, but you still need to listen to air traffic control.
Right.
Yeah. And along those lines, like he's not saying it's not a bad thing to have a strong intellect. It's bad to have it imbalanced with a weakened intuition. So like if you think of each of them like as a wing, you need them to be completely balanced if you want to like fly straight or fly at all.
Right. I like that there's like a grand narrative arc. I can see why like the ESP class would be like very into the classes, right? Like it's one thing to be like, oh, here's the nature of reality, here's all this stuff now, but then you introduce this sort of like very fun, like Gnostic sort of thing of just like, no, but it like wasn't meant to be like this, and we're actually like a fallen reality, and like like there's like sort of a Christian allegory in there where like there was the fall and then man's ego became like this and we became detached from like the greater universe, God in parentheses.
There's like
like
a narrative appeal to that, like, oh, we went too far.
We're not just in a normal universe, we're in a special, cool, fucked up universe.
I mean, it just adds to like the dramatic arc, right?
Yeah.
Like we went too far. Now we have to really pull together and get ourselves out of this.
It gives you like a direction,
Yeah. When you were reading that quote, what I was thinking of is just like what I'm recognizing as one of the aspects of the nature of reality is that it always has this kind of like compounding, vicious cycle aspect. And I think that works for good or bad, for healthy development or the opposite. And so it's very important, but I think like our beliefs about materialism have what brought us into that overly egotistical in the Sethian sense mindset, because in the within materialism the intuition is just some woo-woo noise. Of course we can't listen to that. We have science that gives us like what's pure, true, and factual. And everything else we have to discard because that's only going to muddy the waters.
But like, presumably this mistake happened like way earlier in like our like historical history, right? Like our physical history.
Right.
Like we're talking like earlier cultures that weren't like necessarily as scientific material as us, right?
Although he does say that it was around the Industrial Revolution where people stopped believing that their thoughts had any effect on reality, which is really interesting to me because I'm like, I don't feel like I have seen like literature from that era that really talks about manifestation.
Well, that's weird because like we have Industrial Revolution and then a little bit after that we have like Civil War era, right? And like apparently the Civil War era was like a huge bloom of like spiritualism in America where people were like trying to talk to ghosts and shit. Like they were trying to talk to ghosts. They were doing like, revivalist, like fucking, what's it called? Like Baptist or
right,
like all that kind of stuff.
But before that, there was like witch stuff. Like
True.
I'm just wondering. I often think of terms of like, thinking about our modern age with the internet and like the polyculture versus like the monoculture. And the monoculture wasn't always standard either. Like I was wondering if like some of these thoughts like took hold because of the monoculture, because the official line of consciousness like took hold during those times. Whereas like the first time people have access to like the same, newspapers or whatever it might be that like brought everybody along the same frequency.
Mm. So you think like it's less of an issue of like what the idea was and more of an issue of like a lack of like intellectual diversity to sort of play with stuff around? Is that what you're saying?
I just think like that is a factor, like our technological abilities to like get on the same page or get on a different page are definitely having a big effect on what's going on in the times.
Right. Oh yeah, agreed, 100%. I feel like it's almost like a weird like hourglass sort of thing where it's like you had like a diversity of information that like with technology became like bottlenecked, sometime around the time that it was like radio and TV and stuff like that. And then now the internet's sort of going the other way.
And I think even in my childhood, there's a strong remnants of this idea of like this existence of experts.
Yeah.
And like, I'm sure it still exists, but like, I remember just how frustrated and angry I was when I became disillusioned that like, oh, a doctor isn't actually just like this point of brilliance that knows everything I need to know about my health. Like the monoculture and like, the conscious manipulation of advertisement like brings in this idea that like the experts say this is gospel, therefore it's the truth. Like you see how like things become aligned in a monoculture sort of way in that way.
Yeah, I think connecting it with like mass marketing is like really smart.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of like cultural critics have pointed out that like that is really where a lot of like that type of culture came from, right?
Yeah.
It's like putting so much effort into like, the propagandists or whatever, turning to like the corporate world and then being like, let's create the kind of culture that we want to live in as a sort of like professionalized bureaucratic culture.
Right. I wonder if there's like a good book about that, about like just an anthropological like study of like the official line of consciousness of like how like.
Oh, do you want a title?
Sure.
I'll look it up. It's something. It's like something with the spectacle. I'll look it up.
Have you read this?
I have it down in the bookshelf, I think. I read part of it. I think it's Society of the Spectacle, something like that. It's like a really short book, but it's really kind of cool. Yeah, Society of the Spectacle by Guy Debord.
Huh.
Listeners, if you want some interesting insight into this.
I love the title.
Yeah.
What do you remember? Like, did he draw any conclusions, or is he just kind of like outlining like this is?
I feel like it kind of plays like a manifesto. It's like talking about like how at a certain point of like media technology, you create a thing called like the spectacle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like how the social world gets sort of subsumed into the imaginary recreation of itself. Like you become engrossed not with the actual world you're living in, but with the reproduction of the world that's given back to you by consumer culture, which you then consume instead of participating in.
Without the awareness that there's a distinction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how like this can be used by like the powers that be, right? To sort of like pacify and control people's behavior.
Yeah.
Because they become less active in the imaginary sort of like involvement in the creation of their own culture.
Yeah.
Right. And like how sort of like who you are as a person, is it so embedded in fitting in with your culture that like you sort of like you're a fly on like fly paper, you just can't get away. And if the culture goes a certain way, you kind of just get like pulled with it. And like this is sort of the trick that happens to do that. It's like that kind of stuff, like then sort of like dovetails in really well with like the Noam Chomsky, like what's that called? Where he talked about like newscasters.
I don't think I know.
What is that? Basically the idea is like we don't have like an official censorship bureau of the news that says like you must have this position on this topic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's something we criticize in totalitarian governments.
Right.
But we just so happen to, in our news companies, only hire people who are predisposed to have certain positions. And if
Mhm.
they don't have those positions, they don't get hired into the job of being a newscaster. So you end up having all of the mass media sort of like creating the same narrative anyways without having to centrally say, this is the narrative we want you to create.
It's very interesting that I don't know how old that book is, but I feel like the last 10 years have like shed a lot of new light on these concepts, right? Because
Yeah.
we have all these people of certain ideologies, like, just vilifying like certain media outlets. And it's become obvious that most media outlets do have a bias in one direction or another.
Right.
And like it was probably always the case.
Yes.
Even when we were all agreeing on what the news was, right? It was still biased.
Well, I mean, even look at like censorship in the United States, right? Like a lot of really early activists were like fighting for like, you should be able to have a couple like together in the same bed in a movie screen, like the amount of like control over like, this is the only acceptable type of intimacy that we can culturally acknowledge,
Very interesting. I love this conversation, by the way.
Big digression episode.
But it always comes back. It somehow does. What are we not telling the listener? What does the listener need to know more about this chapter?
Can I read about the demon?
Yeah.
All right, here's the quote about the demon. If you are obsessed with the idea of evil, then you will meet evil conditions. We're talking about like in your dreams. If you believe in devils, then you will encounter these. As I mentioned earlier, there is greater freedom when consciousness is not physically directed. Thoughts and emotions are constructed again into reality without the physical time lapse. So if you believe you will be met by a demon, you will create your own thought form of one, not realizing that it is of your own creation. Therefore, if you find yourself concentrating upon the evils of physical existence in such a manner, then you are not ready for such explorations. It is of course possible under such conditions to meet a thought form belonging to someone else, but if you do not believe in demons to begin with, you will always recognize the nature of the phenomena and be unharmed.
What'd you think of that?
I thought it was interesting.
Yeah.
I feel like there's something to that. Just like the idea of like encountering supernatural phenomenon with the attitude of, well, I don't believe in you.
Yeah. I've heard that, like that's the most powerful way to like diffuse a nightmare.
Yeah.
And in some sense you see, and I think this cuts both ways, but when a parent tells a child that a monster isn't real, that's kind of the idea they're getting to. It's like you don't have to believe this is real and therefore you won't create it. But I think when I say it cuts both ways, it's like I feel like that parental like kind of quasi God authority telling a child what is and what isn't real, like it gets into that what I was just talking about, like this idea of like there's these experts or these like sources of people that you can actually like trust to get, like true reality.
Yeah. Ideally, what you'd want it to do is like show the child how to discover that it's not real. Right?
Yeah.
Because then you're building that capacity inside of them.
Yeah.
You know what this reminds me of, like the general advice that you shouldn't take psychedelics going into it with a bad mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, on a trip versus in a dream, you do create what you see.
Yeah. And I think, from all the circles I've traveled in, that's widely accepted as the best advice for, any sort of psychonaut, any activity like that. Yeah. And I was thinking when you're reading that, the previous chapter, when Seth was talking about how he has to like, not that he had to, but he took it upon himself to be a part of this organization that helps people like develop after they die, like to come out of their strong beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not that they're like creating, like when we're the Arab incident where he's like Moses and Allah are there, like it's not a direct creation if like these other entities are acting in it, but it's like it's almost like that's the only form of reality that they'll accept. Do you know what I'm saying?
Right.
So therefore it's kind for these other higher beings to step in there play that play and direct it to a resolution that's acceptable and that brings you back to like this safer baseline that you need.
I like the idea of like considering it as like kind, right?
Yeah.
Like that there's sort of like a kindness in sort of like working within someone's own like frame of reference.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's easy to see in that example where that person was like so rigidly into their beliefs about like suffering, and this like cosmic battle has to happen. Like, you know, someone has to step in and at, you know, the point of death is where it happens, is like prevent them from continuing to create that reality.
Yeah.
Because otherwise hell would exist. Like we've talked earlier about like you wouldn't mind living forever, but like if you were bad at creating a reality, you could just be in hell.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So in some sense, death is kind of like a reset, you know?
On that note, I thought it was interesting, like further in the chapter now, Seth sort of talks about how you can start working on your homework ahead of time a little bit.
Yeah.
You can actively go into your dreams and do the play for yourself. So you don't have to do it when you're dead. You can just like be already there, sort of.
He says that about a lot of areas, or like any area of development. You don't have to wait to your next life to move in any direction that you want to. And I think he kind of implies that you shouldn't necessarily.
Yeah.
You shouldn't take this attitude or like, oh, I can't wait till, you know, this some future point, or then I'm going to start doing something I really want. I think our version of getting caught up in that, or at least in my world, is like retirement. I work for the state at a mental health facility, and we have this thing called a high five. So our retirement is based on the average salary of our like consecutive 5 highest grossing years. And so what a lot of people try to do for their high five is work as much as possible, as much overtime as they possibly can. And because it's so poorly run, there's a lot available, and people just like live at work. And it just rubs me the wrong way, because I feel like a lot of people that get caught up in this, first of all, they're just like, they're caught in the idea that like money is the answer to everything.
Right.
But like they're pushing off what they really want into some fictional future point. And I've seen it firsthand, but a lot of people that spend years and years and years working like this, then they retire. Either A, they don't know what to do with themselves, or B, some of them just like don't live for more than a few more years.
Right.
And it's crazy how frequently it happens.
Listener, get off the grind set. You could get hit by a car tomorrow. It's not worth it, bro.
My suggestion would be just like, if there's something you really want to do, don't put it off.
Yeah.
And my personal path of that, I would say that any life that has challenge and struggle, but there's like true meaning and purpose behind it, it's not experienced as a negative to me. You know, like I'm striving for something that I feel like I really want. And so all the work and the challenge that I'm putting in toward it is meaningful. It makes me feel good and valued. But if I was doing that same, like if we're thinking, and Seth is big about this, is like getting outside of our ideas of like working as a unit of time, you know, especially in creative work. But like if we're caught up in this idea of like, oh, I just got to put in this hard work and then the thing that I want can start, that's kind of a trap.
Mm-hmm.
Just comes down again to divorcing yourself from the idea of physical cause and effect.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, you can see how these beliefs, and maybe this gets into like what Seth is saying about like our ego, it's just taking it too far. It's like these sort of, in some sense, like, you know, it makes me think like we have this strength, but we're just directing it in the wrong way. And so like maybe when we can get that fix in, I think we're in good shape.
Mm-hmm.
What else do we have in this chapter?
There's a little part about Seth going on tour that was cute.
On tour? Is that like the parentheticals?
Yeah. Rob was going to ask Seth about like doing tour dates for the book, and Seth's like, well, we'll talk about it later. But apparently they did go on tour for the book when it got published in 1970.
I don't know too much about that, honestly.
Me neither.
I feel like that'd be an interesting, like, there's got to be people doing book tours for this kind of stuff nowadays, right? Like, there's got to be some channels out there.
There's all kinds, I think. Our book club has met, maybe it was before you came around, with someone from Wisconsin that
That's right.
claims to be a channeler, and it was an interesting experience. I came away with this not feeling definitive in one way or another. Like,
Yeah.
I know I'm into Seth, but like I still approach these things with some amount of skepticism.
They got to get back into doing like old school miracles.
Yeah, I mean, it would work. I found the quote that I was looking for earlier. I'll just read the whole paragraph here. In other words, the environment, conditions, and methods of perception will not be alien. You are not suddenly thrust into an unknown. That unknown part is part of you now. It is part of you before this physical birth, and it will be after physical death. These conditions, however, have been blotted out of your consciousness in the main throughout physical history. Mankind has had various conceptions of his own reality, but he has purposely, it seems, turned away from them in the last century. There are many reasons for this, and we will try to cover some of that.
Oh.
That was the last century part that I knew was in there somewhere.
All right. So in that time frame, that's since 1870.
Yeah. I'm not exactly sure what he means by purposely. And he says it seems, so it sounds like he's not even totally sure.
Yeah, to be determined.
Mankind has had various conceptions of his own reality, but he has purposely, it seems, turned away from it in the last century. Do you think that could just be the monocultural thing that I was talking about?
Turned away from reality, or turned away from what?
Various conceptions of his own reality.
It's saying mankind has turned away from its own reality?
It's hard to say.
Yeah.
Before that, he's talking about other valid realities that exist at the same time. And then he's talking about how you don't perceive them.
Okay, so maybe it's like a spiritual development thing, like mankind's turning away from physical reality in favor of these other realities?
I think the term "it" is maybe confusing. Maybe it would have been more clear to say them. I don't know.
Huh. Something happened in the last century.
Yeah, that's why I got into the monoculture thing. But
Right.
I felt like, yeah, just people left to their own devices, like thinking of, I don't know, rural people in this country. They're just like, they just have these like smaller pockets of community to like.
It's still a monoculture. Bona fide, having lived in the rural world, it's a monoculture. They're all eating the same food, watching the same TV. It's monoculture.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That like pre-television, like you're just like a farmer like 150 years ago.
Yeah.
You're
right.
cut off then.
Yeah.
And so like then if your mom or your uncle has a really strong conception about, there's a ghost in the barn, you might grow up like giving that a lot of validity,
Mhm. Yeah.
I'm not exactly sure. That happens a lot. Seth says something, they're like, please tell us 3 more paragraphs on just that. Yeah, the basic idea is he's saying that, yeah, all this after death stuff is stuff that we're used to, and the biggest barrier is going to be our beliefs.
I thought it was kind of interesting. There's a little tidbit right at the end where Seth talks about like apparitions of like
Mhm.
people who come back to like kind of just like vibe in reality, and like they're doing their like little nervous like hand washing motions because they're just like nervous, and that's why they came back.
He was comparing the inertia of some apparitions or like even experiences that we have with ghosts to like somebody with like OCD,
Yeah.
where it's that like kind of nervous, focused energy that's just like kind of caught in a loop.
Yeah. But then there's like a part there where like there's still like an afterlife like development they need to do. Like they're still in the process of sort of like working out all the kinks in their afterlife like stuff. And there's like an interesting part where he sort of like hints like, well, in your dreams you can like, help them with that, right? Like you can actively help your dead loved ones with their afterlife sort of like job that they got to do.
Do you remember where or what he was
Let me
saying?
find it, yeah.
Like, was he implying that like you can help them understand that they're a ghost in this world or something?
Let's see. As a rule, however, they can perceive you on those occasions. What you often forget is that such individuals are in various stages of development. Some have stronger connections to the physical system than others. The length of time an individual has been dead in your terms has little to do with whether or not you will be so visited, but rather the intensity of the relationship. As mentioned earlier, however, in the sleep state, you may help recently dead persons, complete strangers, to acclimate to after-death conditions, even though this knowledge is not available to you in the morning. So others, strangers, may communicate with you when you are sleeping and even guide you through various periods of your life. Well, I guess Seth emphasized that they're like strangers too at this point, so maybe it's not that.
Yeah, I thought he was just referencing like the previous chapter where there was like that after death like help thing.
Yeah, like Jane's job.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
But that is, I was curious about that, like the idea of like strangers in dreams too, because like I was saying earlier, we were talking about the continuity that we don't always realize that's there. I feel like if you encounter a stranger in a dream, it's still subjectively experienced as like a stranger. You still might be saying like, "Hi, who are you?"
Yeah.
But often like dreams are like the kind of animal that it's like, since you're creating it, like maybe there is like this underlying sense of like familiarity that it doesn't quite appear as strange as a stranger in this world, where we're like hardcore into the idea that we're like separate and we're not creating this reality.
Right. Which is presumably just like a mistake on our part.
Yeah.
I liked the part with the electrical storm. That was kind of cute
Yeah.
for the listener. So there's like a whole session in here that happens during like a big thunderstorm that's happening, like while Jane and Rob are doing the session. And there's some parentheticals where Rob talks about how like large electrical disturbances are like difficult, like make channeling like difficult. So Seth's able to sort of like push through it, but apparently Jane talks about how like the like spirit channeling felt sort of like pulsing, like there was like waves coming like in and out, and it was like harder for her to like kind of get into it.
Again, I wish there was a little bit more explanation, but it's interesting. We had a recent book club where this same sort of idea came up in a different part of the Seth material. We were reading the early sessions, book 8, and he was referring to the session was taking place in April, and because it was spring, there was like some changeover. He was saying like we're back to ions. The ions of the ground were changing because of the changing of the seasons, and he was implying that it was especially difficult for him, even more so than Jane. And I thought wasn't he implying there was some like danger for him?
Yeah, but he
That was
also
interesting.
left it really ambiguous.
Yeah.
Okay. Danger for him, but not danger for Jane.
Interesting.
Yeah, and that was so curious. I wish he would have went into it more deeply.
Some really toxic spring ions.
But I mean, it wasn't so bad that he was like, "Hey, we got to stop," you know?
Well, that's before they invented 5G though.
Right.
So now the network's up and Seth can't get in at all.
He says stuff about like, like I have a house that has steel siding, and he says that like your house should be like, I think he's talking about this when Jane and Rob are moving somewhere else and they're looking at houses, but he said like you shouldn't have like a metal roof,
Right.
like like, and that presumably so like sort of like frequencies are free to like get through your structure and stuff.
Like you start astral projecting and you like hit the ceiling and you're like, fuck,
Yeah.
get out.
What is it called? A Faraday cage or?
Yeah, Faraday cage.
Yeah, I don't know. But
There's some D&D spells that work like that too.
yeah, I mean, there seems to be some sort of legitimacy to them, right? Scientifically. I mean, I'm not saying the concepts have been bridged into this like in a satisfactory way, but like it seemed to have legitimacy in each of these worlds.
I'm just imagining like someone doing an exorcism and like putting on the big like lead apron that they make you wear at like the dentist, you know?
Yeah. Whatever works. I mean, I know we talked about this, but I was put the tinfoil in my underwear every day just to be safe. You know, that's that's my Pascal's wager.
Yeah, that's your Pascal's.
And like, you know what? I'll take the bad with the good on the chance. Like, yeah.
No one will ever ask me about the crinkling. It's fine.
Oh, that's gotta be so uncomfortable. All right. What else do we got? Is there anything else you guys wanted to say to put a bow on this? This one,
What do you think?
this one unfolded a little differently, I feel like. We went on a deep tangent. But like you said in the beginning, that a lot of this is just reiterating the same thing in different ways. Liana, you got anything else?
There's just one nice quote I wanted to share.
Sure.
Yeah.
He says, in the dream state, you learn, among other things, how to construct your own physical reality day by day, just as after death you learn how to construct your next physical lifetime. In dreams, you solve the problems. In the daytime, you are only consciously aware of the methods of problem solving that you learn in sleep. In dreams, you set your goals, as after death, you set the goals for another incarnation. I just like the quote because he is summing up like the importance of dreams. And as someone who came from like a really STEM background, who was told repeatedly that dreams are just garbage,
Yeah.
that we can just like not pay attention to, this is basically the opposite, where he's telling you like you can use dreams to solve your problems. You can use dreams to better manifest the life that you want.
Yeah. And I was thinking too, like all of those people caught up in materialism, they have their own ideas, but they're not even realizing what fundamental role dreams are playing in their access to those ideas.
Yep.
Yeah, that's cool. And it's also relating, you know, just the gradations of cycles, whether it's a day or a lifetime.
Yeah.
Or a breath.
They call it the big sleep for a reason.
We were talking about, not that we need to get into this right now, but we were talking about the Big Bang in our book club recently, and someone was comparing it to a breath, and I kind of like that.
Ooh.
That's like the breath out, and then theoretically there'd be like a breath in. I don't know.
Yeah. Or like a big fart.
I don't know if farts have the same like cyclical like analogy.
Not normally.
Have you never met someone that can like suck in?
What?
Yeah.
I mean, unless you're making a confession, no.
All right, listener, you'll have to leave the demonstration to your imagination.
That's a good note to end on.
That's a good, yeah. And just that, yeah, everything is in seasons and cycles, it seems like.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, if we're talking about death in this chapter, it has a purpose, and that's a point where that season is changing or that cycle is changing. We're waking up to something different.
Yeah. Get started on your afterlife homework now.
That's our show, but fear not, the never-ending conversation continues next week. If you're enjoying the show, please be so kind as to subscribe, like, rate, and review. And if you're feeling frisky, tell a friend. Contact us at implicatingthereal@gmail.com. You can support the show at patreon.com/implicatingthereal. We are doing our best, but whatever support you can lend helps us appreciably. We are not affiliated with the publishers or proprietors, but we encourage you to get the books. You can follow along as we endeavor to dive deep into the Sethian worldview, and there's really nothing like cultivating your own relationship with the material. Until next week, we wish you a fond good evening.